everybody. Welcome to the DePINed podcast. I'm Tom Trowbridge, a host. Thrilled to have Paul here, the founder of Teleport. And this is a super exciting and very important project that I love for a whole bunch of reasons. So excited to have you here, Paul. Why don't you just quickly dive into tell people what Teleport is?
Yes. Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me. Uh, Teleport is an application that you can use to call a car to pick you up in one location and drop you off in another. I'm sure all of you have used some kind of rideshare application. What's different about Teleport is it's built on the rideshare protocol. That's an open protocol. Kind of the way to think about it is it's open in the sense that email is open. Not a single company owns email. Or the web is open. Not a single company makes the only web browser, right? You have a choice between Safari, Chrome, many alternatives. I think one way to think about this is if a single company owns something, they can exert a lot of control over it. So if email was controlled by a single company, you probably have a lot of speech restrictions. Not that we are complete freedom of speech right now, but you already would have a lot more. Similarly with the web, if a single company owned it, you would see a lot less diversity in applications. Instead, anyone can build on top of it. So one way, I think, to ask this question, why would you want to build something on a decentralized protocol, is approaching it from the angle, how would it look if you built it in a centralized fashion? That's the world we live in, where right now the big rideshare companies take close to 50% from what the customer pays, and the driver only sees the other half. So that's the big challenge we're approaching. And Teleport is a client for the rideshare protocol.
So to make it super clear, it's basically you're building a decentralized Uber, but rather than building an Uber, you're building a decentralized rideshare platform that allows any number of participants to join that platform and serve customers via their vehicles or other services.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's really well put. It's basically creating a situation where instead of having a single monopoly doing rideshare or duopoly that has exactly the same prices, it allows many participants to work together, but without lowering safety, trust, quality. In fact, we think the future of rideshare is all going to be on the rideshare protocol.
I mean, listen, it's a super fascinating topic, and it's that soundbite, decentralized Uber, easy to grasp, but the complexity of building it, I think, is vast. And so, can you kind of dig into what this means? Because the instinct people would first say, well, it's just a platform that can exert rents just like Uber can exert rents. So explain kind of the decentralized nature of all the different components of it, because I think that takes another layer of understanding.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that's important to point out is the difference between decentralization and peer-to-peer. And when I was a little bit younger hacker than now, one of the things that I spent most of my time on, this was like the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s. I worked on something called peer-to-peer software a lot. And peer-to-peer software is this notion, there is no server. It's just anyone who runs a client, whether that's, well, back then it was mostly in a computer or a mobile phone, they all just speak to each other like a mesh network, and there's no centralization anywhere. I think what's interesting to point out is Bitcoin is not quite built on that architecture. Bitcoin is not peer-to-peer. Bitcoin is run in part, like by many different entities, but in part by miners. Miners are essentially, individual entrepreneurs. They can be sole proprietors or can be limited liability corporations, but it is many of these different miners work, and anyone can spin up a miner. So it is decentralized in the sense that you don't need to ask for permission to start a miner. You don't need to ask for permission to build a client, but it is not purely peer-to-peer. So I think there were a lot of people who thought about, we can build a peer-to-peer Uber. And I think that wouldn't work very well. Maybe in the far future as technology evolves, I'm not saying it's completely impossible. I just think it's too hard, especially if you have customers who want safety, they want trust, they want things to just work really well. So what we're doing is decentralized Uber. What does that mean? It means for any role on the network, it is possible for someone else to spin up a competitor. This is already partially true for Uber. The drivers all compete with each other. You can spin up another driver, and that also means by the drivers, there's competition there. The customers compete with each other. If you've tried to get a ride on Halloween Eve in the United States or New Year's Eve almost anywhere in the world, it can be very hard to get a ride because the customers compete with each other. But what's happening right now is that the mobile application and the rideshare server is usually rolled into one, run by a company like Uber, Lyft, Grab, Gojek, Bolt. Wherever you go in the world, there's different operators that also have a client, and they get to set the price, they get to set the terms, they get to tell drivers, if you do this, we're going to kick you, if you don't do this, that. And it actually feels very much like almost like an employee-employer relationship, despite them insisting that it's actually, like a free contractor relationship. But if you're dealing with a monopoly, you don't have that much choice, and it's usually like one or two companies in any market. So how does it work? If you decentralize it, what you need is an operator that connects a driver with a rider, helps with pricing, helps with customer support, helps with finding the best route, and also helps with finding one of the best drivers, okay, a matching algorithm. Then you need a mobile application, usually on iOS or Android, that the driver can use to navigate with and get matched. And you need a mobile application that the rider can use to request a ride. So that's at the core. Now, if you want to have multiple operators that all work in the same market, you need a way for people's identity and reputation to transfer between operators. So that is something you can use public key cryptography for, where you can basically say someone, a verifier, someone who is able to do a criminal background check, and there's a lot of services like this that already exist, can give you a credential that you can store in your crypto wallet. And with you, I mean, this happens all behind the scenes. The application does it for you, so that you can prove to an operator that someone made sure you don't have a criminal background as a driver, you're a real person, your car has been inspected, all the legal requirements that set the safety standard for this. So those are the core components of rideshare. There's a few more other aspects. We call these verifiers for verifying the credentials, operators for matching the drivers with the riders, mobile application developers for making the mobile application, auditors who check that verifiers and operators are actually capable and trustworthy in doing their role. And then, of course, and this is like still a wide open subject where we have some ideas, we have some internal research on it, but we haven't really announced or decided on the absolute correct solution, is as you're growing increasingly decentralized with this, you're going to need some form of governance to ideally, give drivers and riders a say in the governance of this network. We think it's vital to have at least the opportunity of multiple operators in each market. Partially, that's of course the limitation here is actually regulatory, but in many, many markets, it's actually quite easy to apply for a license. Sometimes costly, can be as cheap as free or $1,000 a year. And in some markets, it can be as much as like $50,000 a year. But the main entry barrier is the cost of insurance. Is the cost of insurance and the cost of getting that license. So we believe multiple operators per market. And also we think that the system quite naturally scales because each driver and rider need to be matched in a local geographic area. So for all of the people here who are listening, and I know that's going to be the minority who are distributed systems designers, the way this works, why this is such a problem that is very suitable to actually scaling very nicely is I can just spin up a server that handles a portion of Manhattan and a different portion. And if you take a ride from one place to the other, let's say in New York, in Manhattan, I get matched by the operator that is close to this area, and I'm going to another area. It can be overlapping regions, but the key being here, it can be designed in such a way that, let's say, if I go from New York to Manhattan, I am running with operators who are licensed for New York. When I'm coming back, I'm actually running with the operators that are licensed for New Jersey. But if I take that concept a little bit further, I can actually, even within an operator that covers all of Manhattan, slice up my geographic area into many different spaces. So the actual load on the server is not that high in any small geographic area. It's very natural to essentially split this up into regions that get handled by this client. What I'm getting at is from a technical perspective, this is not crazy challenging, and it's actually quite supportive of running multiple operators. You need it anyway, because in New Jersey, you need different licenses than in Manhattan, even though they're very close. We actually learned a lot of things that were not obvious to us. I think the most interesting thing to me was uh, there's this terrific book by Andrew Chen called The Cold Start Problem, which actually talks quite a bit about his experience at Uber and the challenge of spinning up network effects at companies like Uber, Tinder, Dropbox, which is also where I worked for a bit. And so where I had the first-hand chance to see that. And what was interesting in this book is Andrew points out there's usually a hard side of a two-sided marketplace. Like one side is just harder to get. And in Uber, that was the drivers. Because back then there was just no supply of drivers uh, available because, you know, there were taxi drivers, but there was not the amount of drivers that we have for Uber, Lyft, and just general rideshare as we do now. So they had a lot of challenge spinning this up. What Austin showed us was it's actually the opposite now. These drivers, there's professional drivers, a lot of them. They're extremely savvy, experienced. They have spreadsheets, like literally, they make their own spreadsheets. They have analytics tools. They know exactly what's going on. You know, not all of them, they're amateurs as well, but like you wouldn't believe. There's just like brilliant drivers. They know what's going on. They educate each other. They have groups. They have large contact lists of each other. And well, what we found was these drivers are extremely eager for a better solution. I think what's important to them is that it's credible, that it's not a bait and switch, which is where a protocol comes in. It's kind of like Bitcoin guarantees you there's going to be 21 million coins, not more. That has an impact. That matters, right? Like the more believable you can make it that the rules won't change and can't change, actually. It's not trust. It's just they can't change. The more the drivers like that. So that's very attractive to them. A lot of them are very entrepreneurial. So they love the idea of potentially, you know, becoming an operator or supporting themselves in additional roles on top of driving. So we started for the consensus week. So we turned on, I think we turned on Bitcoin Pizza Day, which I think is May 22nd. I might be mixing up my dates. And by the time Consensus turned on, we had 100 drivers on the platform. By the end of Consensus, I think we had over 250 drivers. And now what's important to note here is Uber pays in some markets $1,200 to $1,600 in incentives to acquire drivers. And then they lose those drivers in coming months at like 10, 12% a month, which is insane. They're basically churning through drivers like crazy because it's cheaper for them to just give them an expectation of much higher pay at the beginning and then give them less and just basically churn through them. So what we know is the drivers know this. The drivers are getting wiser and wiser to this. And again, they make advanced, they have entire community, YouTube channels, discussion forums, spreadsheets, analytics software. So the drivers are just, you know, they're not oblivious to this. They know what's going on. So the takeaway here is we can get drivers if we make a better offering. I think the harder side now, and this is, I haven't heard people discuss this much, is the rider side. So what we got to do is we got to make the quality high enough here and the offering attractive enough to both drivers and riders to kick this off. Now, this would be much harder if Uber and Lyft did a good job. Just it would have been a lot harder for Bitcoin or digital currencies to take a hold if the Federal Reserve, you know, had done a really good job and just in general, like the economic policy of the countries around the world, but like the various financial crises really provided the seed for change here. Like people want something else because they realize even just as a check and balance, right? Just the existence of an alternative might improve the existing systems. So I don't think that Uber and Lyft and others really have the opportunity to cut cost by I mean, they spend 700 million a year just on debt service. They have 33,000 employees. They're just as fat as it gets. And yes, they're going to take 50% and more, sometimes even as high as 80% on some rides from the drivers. That's not going to change. So the drivers want that change. Well, that 50% take rate means for us, Jeff Bezos put it at one point, your margin is my opportunity. So as long as Uber doesn't suddenly get efficient, there's a raison d'être, there's a reason for the existence for something that is much better for drivers and riders. And yeah, that's what we saw in Austin. The drivers are going to actually do anything they can for a better system to become the global standard.
So let's talk about the crypto transparency. Abstracting out the crypto, I think, is a really important thing to do. We're working on doing that at Fluence as well. So users of Fluence won't even know that there's crypto involved, and I think that is going to be a hallmark of really scalable projects. So I completely agree with that. But what is interesting is that in most DePINed projects, trust comes from crypto. Like the crypto economics are what enables parties which aren't known to others or anonymous to be trusted. And with Teleport, it seems that drivers are KYC, their identity is valued, is validated, and users also use credit card information, etc. So trust, crypto does not provide trust. So I guess I'm kind of curious how you think of the need for crypto in Teleport.
I think the challenge is you need to really think through from a user perspective, which is where we started. You can't just start with, we want to use crypto. We don't see ourselves as a crypto company. And I think that shocks a lot of people in the crypto industry, especially, because I have a background in digital currencies and peer-to-peer software and distributed systems. So they assume Paul must be starting a crypto company. I'm not. This is not a crypto company. This is a consumer play. We want 5 billion people using the rideshare protocol. So how do we do this? We need to pick people up where they are right now. That means from the start, actually right now, the only way to use the app is with a credit card. Behind the scenes, it uses stablecoins already. The driver receives a stablecoin. The escrow contract that we're using runs on a stablecoin. All the infrastructure to create interoperability between different operators is built on that. But to the client, it's a normal Swift UI, Apple native, no cross-platform, super easy to use, beautiful iOS application for now. We're getting Android as well, but that's where we're starting. And the user doesn't need to do anything extra. That was the standard. In every product conversation, my requirement is it can't be harder for the driver, it can't be harder for the rider. Now, the driver receives stablecoin. Again, to them, that's just US dollars, and they can push a button that sends that to their bank account, either instant or for like $1 or $2. And within 2 to 3 days, using a normal ACH transfer, we have partners. And luckily, the crypto ecosystem has popped up all of these infrastructure providers. So that's relatively easy to do. In fact, we're going to add other features like an instant debit card where you just literally can spend it with debit card. Obviously, that is not the final goal that we have with this. We actually think stablecoins are phenomenal. I think for the midterm, stablecoins are the future of finance. It's just a better way to handle transactions and build applications for consumer needs in a much better way. What I mean with that is US dollar stablecoins that are cheap and fast and reliable to transfer will unlock so many fintech applications. And it also is actually a really attractive opportunity for us in rethinking the business model here. Because if you think about it, Uber is trying to make all this money by fleecing drivers. We are a small, nimble startup. We are about 15 people right now. Uber has 33,000 employees. We don't have like, $10 billion in debt that we pay 700 million a year in interest on. So we can be nimble. It's a very big thing we're building, but relative to the scale of the market, we can be nimble. Now, if we help some of these great stablecoin providers like Circle USD, PayPal USD, and there's a bunch of new ones also popping up and others, if we help them getting mainstream adoption, these guys are making a lot of money on these US dollar deposits. So if we mainstream the use of stable coins to consumers, and drivers are consumers as well, there's a huge opportunity for us. And partners like that might actually be able to finance the expansion of rideshare into wallets.
I would phrase it slightly differently, but I agree to some extent that in the far future, we will have smart wallets, and the wallets will be able to transact in any number of currencies in a way that optimizes the value for the actual participant based on their preferences and based on their criteria. I think we've got a long way to go before that happens, however. And as we get more stablecoin adoption, as we get more crypto adoption, Bitcoin is the first entry to that. And the store of value story, I think, very much resonates. So I think Bitcoin does enormously well and far into the future. And that kind of smart wallet, multiple currency world you're talking about could certainly happen, but is quite a ways away.
Early. What's really nice about doing what we do right now with these digital collectibles and US dollar stable coins is the customer wants to pay with US dollars in the US. They want to pay with euros in Europe. So I think that is absolutely the right choice. It would be insane to ask of people to use a token to pay. So I think dollars are the right move here. And I think by having a reward system right now that we can play with, where we can basically turn in the incentives that the people who do the most beneficial work for getting this network to grow to receive what we call trip miles. They're non-transferable points that can be converted in these commemorative digital collectibles. By playing with this, we can fine-tune the algorithm of what work on this network means. Because work on the Bitcoin network is kind of obvious. You're mining, right? It's a little bit easier. So it totally makes sense that Bitcoin happened more than a decade earlier. The tooling for this just wasn't there. The thinking, the analysis, the design wasn't there. So right now, we're doing digital collectibles that just commemorate the work done on the network. I think if you go into hypotheticals, and by the way, this is if I talk in very general terms of what would be possible for protocols that are similar, but not necessarily the one that we're doing, I think there's a lot of interesting design space because you want to solve the problem of governance. You want to make sure that the actors on the network, whichever network you talk about, this could be a food delivery network, this could be actually a car rental business like Turo, right? For any of these kind of businesses, you could develop a protocol, and then you want to reward the people who help the adoption. Now, I think finding a way to give governance to the people and a say in the governance who do work is really, really attractive because all of these people are tired of working for someone else when they're supposedly independent contractors. So by creating a way to make sure that the people actually running the network and doing the work have a say in the governance, that is, I think, where a token could come in. Again, we haven't announced anything there, and it would be too early for us to do this. We're right now just kind of testing out what is actually, how is this working? How is this playing together? We're still a few stages early. I'm not saying that we couldn't get to a point where we can say something more definite about does a token make sense or not in the future. We're just not quite there. Sometimes certain projects pick you, you don't pick them. My background comes from, I worked on computer security in the late 90s and early 2000s. I kind of stumbled into that from spending a lot of days in the 90s at the Technical University in Vienna when I was just a teenager and still in school. And my brothers had made this floppy disk called DLX, which was one of the first Linux on a single floppy disk distributions. It's 12 years old, went to school there in Austria and Vienna. And I, after school, went to the Technical University, put that DLX floppy into a Windows computer, and basically had a command line text mode only console. And I think that really changed my life because there were a bunch of Linux lab admins who were like, you look a little bit too young to be here, but they were super friendly, became friends, and invited me in to spend my afternoons after school in the computer lab in the back room with like the lab admins who were also just college students. But that basically became my peer group from then on. And I started actually publishing computer security research, started a hacker group that published a lot of research, got reached out by a bank when I was 16. The guy offered me a job, wanted to meet up in Vienna. It was for one of the larger banks in Austria. And he met me and he was like, "You're 15 years old." And I was like, "No, I'm 16." And anyway, I got that job, and it kind of just showed me that what I thought the box that I was in that was not the real world. There was much more opportunity out there of what could be done. I think I got really lucky in multiple levels, like with my brothers, who are 7 and 8 years older, like developing this thing early on, and then the lab admins being so nice and basically, adopting me just for, like as a pet and like teaching me stuff early on, but it just allowed me to flourish a lot more. So that's kind of where I started off. I worked on a bunch of stuff in Austria, a lot of computer security. I started a computer security conference. I started a hackerspace. I really tried to make Austria work. One of the last things I did was I started a food delivery company that I then sold. But earlier, that was around 2008. But earlier than that, I worked on not just computer security, but also on peer-to-peer software. And specifically, I got really interested in this project called first Mojo Nation, which was a basically IPFS Filecoin built 23 years ago. That was like around 2000. It was crazy. There was currency in there. There was incentives, reputation, storage, and like actually some of the more influential people in the crypto space were the Mojo Nation. So Bram Cohen, who started BitTorrent, was there, and later Chia, which is a different proof of work alternative digital currency, and also Suko, who started Zcash and really helped popularize, CK, zero knowledge technology in the widest sense, and helped fund through his business a lot of the research that is now used in many of these. So I was around there researching BitTorrent, I think around 2003, and I thought I had found a problem in the incentive system of BitTorrent, specifically how the first few fragments are exchanged between these BitTorrent clients. And I thought the solution was obviously some form of reputation. So I tried to build a reputation currency. That didn't work too well, but a lot of what I thought about incentives, design, reputation, and file sharing would shape my life in more ways. I later came to the US and I worked at Dropbox, and I was one of the early engineers there, and I actually built the peer-to-peer component of Dropbox. So many people don't even know this, and that's by design. But when you have multiple Dropbox clients on the same network, they actually speak with each other to avoid the situation where, let's say, one of the people on the network puts a file into a shared folder, it gets uploaded to the server, and then 50 people in the same office all download it at the same time, taking down the network. So my solution was connecting all the clients to each other, and then at least offloading some of the transfer to the local network. So I think the big theme here is a lot of the people who later on went into crypto were early on actually in file sharing technology, like because it just had a lot of similar incentive problems. So around 2011, I read the Bitcoin white paper, and I almost kind of, why didn't I see this sooner, like so many people? But I saw it in 2011, and I realized that is crazy, because I knew this was impossible. You couldn't build Bitcoin. Like the Byzantine generals problem is unsolvable. So I wrote an article basically saying, oh shit, Satoshi solved the thing that we had a proof. You can't solve the Byzantine generals problem. And we can go into it, but I think at this point, probably many listeners already know what this is. But back then, I wrote an article, and a bunch of people who really helped popularize crypto read my article on Hacker News and were like, getting into the space because of it. I think famously, like Naval says, my article actually got him into crypto. So I got in touch with all of these really cool people. And yeah, I went onward from there, worked on a bunch of other things, had a stab at a decentralized social network. I was in 2016. I was it was bad timing on multiple fronts. The strategy wasn't quite right. But what actually fascinated me was this whole notion: can crypto networks do more than just currency? Is there something else you can do? And is there also something where, in fact, they're not just slightly worse traditional networks, but can they actually be better? And can they be so much better that they siphon off people from the existing network to come over? And I do think there's an opportunity. I can go into, a whole separate conversation why I think we were wrong on timing and strategy, even though we made some really cool innovation. I think where I changed my view over the years then was, okay, if we want to get these decentralized technology that I think is heavily vital for, actually for the existence of civilization, you can't have too much centralization or it just all shuts down. You need decentralization to allow a little bit of breathing room for entrepreneurs to actually be able to develop new things. If it's all centralized and you're locked out from innovating, if all innovation becomes permission because a few companies own everything, that's just not going to work. So I was thinking about this, and I think around 2021, I was in a situation where I was talking with a friend who had previously worked at Uber, and I was not so deep in crypto at the time, but very, very smart. And I was talking with another friend who was very, very deep into crypto, but not, so much into marketplaces. And I was kind of discussing all the new innovation in DeFi at the same time as I was explaining crypto to a friend. And kind of in between that synthesis, it became clear to me that some of these toys, I would call them toys that had been developed because they're not really mainstream yet in DeFi, could be used to build decentralized Uber.
Can you explain why the protocol costs can't increase with Teleport the way it does or has with Uber over time? What are the mechanisms and setup that allow that price to remain competitive and low and valuable for drivers and consumers?
My view is the best time to build a decentralized alternative is exactly after a centralized system has reached a point where it stops innovating at high pace. And I think that's the point we're at. Like before the pandemic, Uber was charging closer to 20%. Now they're charging closer to 50%. So the only thing that's really left for them is to take more and more and more. And I don't think that's really going to stop until like a peak where the market is just unable to bear more. But it's definitely trending to about 50%. In 2023, it was 47%. But what's happened along the way is they actually created rules in their various states and countries that allow people to operate rideshare. That wasn't the case before. The technology has gotten really mature. We have really good mapping APIs that you can use. You have very powerful mobile phones. On multiple levels, the market is ready for it. Then on the other side, technically, yes, you could have built a competitor that is completely centralized again. But the problem is, if you do this the traditional way, you need to spend billions of dollars to acquire market share. And that means your economics are going to look exactly the same as Uber. So if you take the centralized alternative that says they're better for drivers that already exist, it's called Lyft, and they're charging exactly the same thing as Uber. And you can't credibly say you're going to do something different, because if you need to raise billions of dollars to compete, well, you have shareholders, and the shareholders don't like donating their money to the drivers. So basically, the model is broken. It's just financially not viable. So why can we build it in a decentralized fashion now? Well, we needed stable coins, which exist now. It's fairly new that stable coins have like high enough liquidity and consumer friendliness. We need high transaction speed, low cost. We need off ramps and on ramps. You need to be able to pay with credit card. You need to be able to withdraw to a bank account. It just needs to be just as easy as the existing system. In fact, most of our users will never know crypto is involved. Just like people don't know what e-commerce is. Every commerce is e-commerce now. In fact, you don't even talk about commerce anymore. It's just paying, right? It's just payments. Things get simpler. So I think we're right at that inflection point where it can get so simple, you don't need to know crypto exists. Every app, everything will be based on crypto, just like everything right now is built on digital currency already, which is the digital ACH dollar. So other things that we're lacking are proper governance structures, voting, ways to create things like NFTs and tokens easily on a network. All of this, I don't think was ready 3 years ago. What we're doing is we're creating credentials on chain, and I think this will happen anyway, where you can prove you're over 21 years old, you have a driver's license from the state of New York, you're able to do these things, and then you can use it between multiple applications. Now you have multiple operators. You want to be able to prove you have an average score of above 4.8 without revealing all of the trip details, because they're actually kind of confidential. You don't want to have all the places where you're picked up and where you're going out on the open web. So like you basically need some kind of cryptographic proof for the reputation, for the identity. You need to prove other things. If you want a system that rewards drivers and riders and everyone participating for fairly, taking actual rides, you need to verify that people actually contributed by inviting people who took real rides on the network, right? All of that needs to be auditable and out there if you want to create a system where the participants who are building it get that. If you could try to build something like Fluence in a more centralized fashion, but then you would have AWS.
Sorry, so would the driver still be using the same teleport app, same app umbrella, and just be switching providers underneath it, or they actually become different applications?
Spinning up an operator is essentially running a piece of code. You can run it yourself, or you can have a hosted service run it for you if you're an operator, kind of like WordPress. The code is open source. You can run it yourself on a Linux server. It's a lot of work. Or you can go to WP Engine or WordPress.com. WordPress.com is the official hosting service of the developers of WordPress, but WP Engine is a private competitor. They're doing the same thing. They're running it for you. You need that piece of software. You need license. You need insurance. We're working already with a great insurance provider. There will be packages for operators down the road where you can basically just sign up with a set of different insurance companies. And what you then can do is you can spin up a competing operator. So let's say in the state of New Jersey, there's only one operator. That operator starts charging more and more. Well, it's not that hard to start a competitor that just charges less, like in any free market. And of course, people like that, since the drivers are the same and the riders are the same, there's really not an incentive to go with the operator that takes more from the driver, because the drivers are not going to accept those rides. If they charge the customers more, well, the customers are just going to go with the cheaper provider. So the beauty of the free market here really comes into play. I do think operators are going to be profitable, but they're not going to be 50% margin profitable like Uber. So they are under the TRIP protocol. So the way to think about it, right, with email, you have the simple mail transfer protocol, SMTP, and a bunch of other standards. I'll just call it the email protocol. And then you have the web protocol for the World Wide Web, which includes HTTP and a bunch of other things. You have different mail clients, right? You have Apple Mail, you have Outlook, you have Google Mail, just like you have Safari, Brave, Firefox, Chrome. So you have different browsers. Teleport is just one browser of many browsers that can operate on the TRIP protocol. And it's just one, or rather the rideshare server we're building for the rideshare protocol, it's just a reference implementation. Someone else can take it once it's open sourced, can edit it or make a completely new implementation that's better and more performant. We're already having conversations with people, for example, who have really good data on ride sharing, and they want to, for example, have a better pricing engine as a service. Like that's something they're considering. They haven't committed to it, but it's really attractive to them to do that. So there will be a thriving market, right? So like one might be a hosting provider, someone else might provide a really good pricing engine. And so you can use the standard code, the open source version, or you can use some premium version, because then you get more of the rights as an operator, because you just have a much tighter control over pricing, tighter control over route planning. So I think there will be a very competitive market. There will be margins for the best operators. I don't think we need 100 operators in the state of New Jersey, but two or three would be nice.
You mentioned earlier that Bitcoin was your entry to the sector, and is obviously most people's entry, what most people find out about first. What kind of prediction do you have for Bitcoin by the end of the year? I gotta put you on the spot.
You know, I think Bitcoin was and is one of the smartest things I've ever seen. It was a complete breakthrough. My suspicion is that whoever worked on it probably worked on it for 2 decades. Like it's an insane, like not alone. There were a bunch of other people again preparing the ground for it, but it was just such an intellectual breakthrough. Huge, enormous fan. I think Bitcoin is going to do really well because I think it's the one project in crypto that has truly proven product market fit in the sense of being a store of value. I think it's about as good as you can get for that use case. I think so. I give you my midterm view. I think Bitcoin is going to do really well. I think, especially with all the uncertainty and all the struggles that governments have, I think my long term view is slightly more controversial. I think the one threat to Bitcoin actually is not another currency, not another token. I actually think the future of money is not money, it's barter. I think that when you make it as easy as Apple Pay to use crypto, where you're actually going to end up with is if you want to be paid in tomato futures and I want to receive Apple stock, that makes it possible as long as there's a liquid path between those two on a network that's high performance and efficient, that might become an option. So I'm almost like deferring to, a fellow Austrian, Friedrich Hayek, who really, thought that what we need is a competition between currencies. I would just take it one step further. It might not even be currencies. The future is just barter between all kinds of things. And some of those things might look like currencies and others are just going to be weird instruments or stocks or protocol tokens. I think the future is weirder than you or I can imagine. So in the midterm, I think Bitcoin is going to kill it. I think in the long term, it might get a lot more complicated or easier, if you will.
How do people follow Teleport? How do they follow Paul? How do they stay in touch? How do they get involved?
So Teleport is Teleport XYC on X or Twitter, if you will. I'm Paul Bohm on Twitter or X. And the best way to really get involved right now is to join our Telegram community, which is linked from Teleport website, Trip website, all of that. Just follow me, follow Teleport XYC on Twitter or X. It links to all of these places. We have over 4,000 people in the active Telegram community. People are helping unlock cities around the globe right now. And our goal is not to do like a slow city by city rollout. Really, we want to bring this to as many people as fast as possible. So now's the time to get involved. And I'd love to see you all on Twitter and in Telegram.
Listen, Paul, thank you so much for being on. So interesting to hear about what you're doing with Teleport. I think it's super important, to be fighting this fight and to be working for both drivers to make more, consumers to pay less, and helping disrupt some of these real rideshare oligopolies. So thrilled you're out there working on it. Wish you all success, and want you back on here after we've, after you've launched more markets and after everything is even more scaled than it is right now. So thanks again for being on, Paul.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for having me. This was a fantastic conversation.